Reinforcements for Wagner's final assault on Bakhmut are pouring into the city in the form of the Chechen's Akhmat Special Forces. Ukrainian reinforcements force their way into Bakhmut through fields in a Mad Max fashion, proving they do not need roads when the ground is dry. Ukraine claims they have shot down a hypersonic missile, and both sides are probing the front lines in new areas of the front. All of this in today's Frontline Report. First, we will start with Bakhmut, where major clashes are taking place. Wagner mercenaries told the world they were leaving Bakhmut, but instead, reinforcements are pouring in. These fresh troops belong to none other than Ramzan Kadyrov, the Gucci camo wearing Chechen leader. These Chechen troops are Akhmat's special forces, which have already played a huge role in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It has been some months since we heard anything from them, so I assume they have spent the winter resting, training, and building back up their numbers. At the same time, Ukraine is rushing forces into the parts of Bakhmut that they still control using the open fields which appear to be dry at the moment. The Russians have failed to capitalize on capturing Bakhmut during the rainy season. The Ukrainians were having a lot of trouble moving in reinforcements down narrow, muddy roads covered in artillery. Now, with dry fields, there is many more paths to take into the city, at least for now, as weather forecast is once again calling for rain over the next few days. Ukraine will be looking to either move in enough reinforcements during this time period to hold the city or take the opportunity to evacuate. Based on how the Ukrainians have been fighting up till now, which do you think is more likely? What's up, everyone? New World Economics here with the 7th of May 2023 Frontline Report for the Russo-Ukrainian War. Please consider hitting that subscribe button. It is so easy and totally free for you to do, but it is a big help for me to grow the channel. I want to give a special thanks to Gavrilo Princeup and a huge thanks to Steve Buckley for your super chat donations. Really, guys, above and beyond, very cool and much appreciated. Now back to the Frontline Report. All right, guys. So as I was saying with these Chechen guys, a lot of you probably are aware of this, but some of you might not be. But the Chechens were a big part in the Russian capture of the city of Mariupol. They essentially took on the same role that the Wagner group is taking on in Bakhmut, kind of like an outside group. They're Russian military, of course, but they're full of ethnic Chechens. They're commanded by Chechens. The Chechens typically throughout history are considered to be like more warlike people. I'm not saying that they're better fighters or anything than your typical Russian or your typical Ukrainian, but it appears like they have been highly motivated in past battles in different parts of the front. So it's definitely noteworthy that their presence is starting to pop up inside of Bakhmut. Now, I want to explain these large white areas that I have here marked on the map. I had these marked yesterday. These were the areas where the Russian attack on the Ukrainian positions was the strongest. And these were the areas that we were getting sporadic reports from Russian sources. And I want to be clear about that. It was Russian sources, so there's potential bias in that information, that they had pushed the Ukrainians out of these areas and they were either under Russian control or gray zone. So I mark information like that in these white boxes because I'm not going to say that the Russians control it or that the Ukrainians don't control it. This is just the information that there's strong attacks in these areas. It's possibly gray zone. Well, we have gotten some confirmation that some of the ground in the residential area to the north, right in this area close to the school and the post office, was captured. There are some sources saying that the school and the post office in the area is under Russian control. I'm not seeing that from some of the more reliable mapping sources that I typically go off of, like Syriac Maps and so on and so forth. Some sources that I somewhat trust and give pretty reliable information are suggesting otherwise, but I like to wait for some of the more official sources to go ahead and mark this stuff down. And of course, it's always possible that the Ukrainians manage to counterattack and push the Russians out of areas that they've recently captured. So we always like leave room for that. In terms of the situation in Bakhmut, it seems to be pretty bad at the moment, but Ukraine does have a short window of opportunity. From these videos we're seeing, it does appear like the fields are somewhat dry. Ukrainian vehicles are, moving through these off-road areas with a lot more ease than they have over the last couple months. So, big L for the Russians to even allow Ukraine to hold on for this long. I don't want to stress enough that it's very impressive that Ukraine managed to hold on to Bakhmut until May, especially after a lot of the stuff we were seeing going on in January and February. Um, but nevertheless, the Russians probably got a later start than they wanted to on moving into the town. A lot of people consider this Battle of Bakhmut to have lasted for 8 or 9 months. If you really think about it, the Russians weren't actually entering the city until, late December, mid January, like that range is when they started actually taking some city blocks inside of Bakhmut. All the battles before that were going on the flanks. So, while technically that was the Battle of Bakhmut, like the battle inside of Bakhmut has been is going on 4 months, perhaps even 5 months now. It depends on how much longer the Ukrainians can hold on. But they will be looking to capitalize on an opportunity here to either move reinforcements in or evacuate the town, which I just think is highly unlikely. The Ukrainians haven't done much evacuating at all throughout the entire war, unless they absolutely have to. So, moving on, we're going to talk about some other areas of the front where there's a surprising amount of activity. We're going to go up north to the Kupiansk area, which this is a big one here. Yesterday, I got a whiff that there was some Ukrainian assault actions in the area. The Russians had claimed that they destroyed a number of Ukrainian deep reconnaissance groups. I think the information said that the Russians destroyed 4 Ukrainian DRGs in this area, and I'm not saying that's true. It's probably not, or it might be. Who knows? It depends on, I guess, like really how bloody this war, if we're getting lied to or not. Like it's certainly possible that Ukraine can lose 4 groups of special forces troops and still manage to capture a large area. Who knows? But the main takeaway that I got from that bit of information is, Ukraine is actually conducting assault actions in this area. And today we got an update from Syriac Maps that they had captured a number of fields in between Petropavlovka and I guess this town is called Vilshana right here, that the Russians have controlled for some time. So there you have the Ukrainians creating a larger buffer between Kupiansk and the Russian border areas. Now, I did say previously that this area was a concern for the Ukrainians in terms of potential Russian assault actions in the area. I don't think this yet, at least. I don't think this is any kind of indicator that that's not going to happen. In several instances on the battlefield, we've seen things like this. Like, say, in Kherson last year, the Russians were actually capturing ground like a week before the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive and started, retaking a lot of ground from the Russians. Last month we saw the Russians capturing some ground in the Zaporozhye region before ceding it right back to the Ukrainians. I'm not sure if this means anything yet at this point. We'll see if the Ukrainians try to push any further. If the Ukrainians try to capture Vilshana very recently and try to move north towards these roads here, like say this way, that would be a big problem for the Russians. And it might show that I had a wrong read on this situation and that the Ukrainians are actually trying to recapture this area, which is a surprise to me. But this could just be some kind of battlefield shaping operation at the time. Moving down to the area of Bilogorovka, we're getting more reports of Russian assault actions in this area. Not much to go on in terms of like progress or what's going on. And of course, you guys know I'm for months I've been skeptical of what the front lines actually are in this area. These front lines here are very generic. I just have basically straight lines drawn through stuff. I don't think the Russians have actually have positions inside of Sporne, the town, but we've heard rumors that they have a pumping station, which is right here. I know some of you guys can't see my mouse, uh, but nevertheless, I just kind of have a straight line there because I don't know who to believe on where the front line is exactly. But this does make me believe that the Russians are trying to push on Seversk still. There have been a lot of Russian assault actions in this area here. Now, an area I want to talk about real quick that I think this area is kind of fascinating, and there hasn't been a whole lot of fighting here for a while, especially to the north. I guess you could say in this area right here, the Russians really haven't done much movement. Early on in the war, the Russians were pushing around here in Novoselivka, Bakhmutovka, which has recently actually fallen to the Russian side. They didn't occupy any of this ground here to the south before the war started. This has all been captured recently, but the lines here between Toretsk and Gorlovka have barely moved. There's barely been any combat in this area. So for the Russians to be pushing on New York, kind of surprising, kind of stupid, in my opinion. I think that, if New York is some kind of goal here, previously last year, the Russians were attempting to push. I actually did try to find a new drawing tool, and I couldn't find one. So if anyone has any ideas, post it in the comments, but this drawing tool annoys me. But the Russians were trying to push up through New York this way, didn't have much success, had to abandon it, I think, because they were taking losses. Attacking this way, I think, is pretty silly. At the same time, in my opinion, the Russians would have a lot better success and would cause a lot more problems for the Ukrainians. It typically doesn't do this on this specific map, but maybe it's because I'm in presentation mode. Um, but if the Russians were started trying to move up this highway, and this is a major interstate highway, this is the Donetsk Ring Road. This actually connects Konstantinivka directly to Donetsk. So if they start moving up this highway and start capturing some of these smaller towns, Novoklinove, Alexandropil, Sukabalka, Stara Mykolaievka, if they started doing this and put New York in a similar semi-encirclement that they have Avdiivka, that they have Seversk, like some of these other places, that would give them a pretty good opportunity to, put some artillery on the area and potentially even dramatically endanger the situation for Toretsk, which is another large town. And zooming out a little bit more and looking at this and seeing why Avdiivka is so important, the Ukrainians occupy a section of that Donetsk ring road here in Avdiivka. So should the Russians actually manage to push the Ukrainians back from Avdiivka, capture this ring road, they'll then have a direct connection between like the rear of Donetsk and Makivka, interstate connections all the way up to the front line, which I can't even stress enough how big of a deal that would be. Of course, the Russians would be able to move in reinforcements very, very quickly to the front line. A lot of like people don't realize like a lot of this stuff in terms of logistics. Like if you're in an area, like say the Russians want to launch a large attack in a small area that doesn't have a lot of roads. There's a lot of difficulty in doing that, and one of the main reasons is both sides have good observation capabilities. It's hard to spot all the drones and shoot down all the drones. And say if Russia wants to launch an attack with 20 tanks and 80 armored vehicles or something like that, which would be a very strong, very significant force, right, for either side. So in one area that would be really hard for either side to stop, but neither side really launches large attacks like that because a force like that, 100 armored vehicles, you're gonna see it staging. further back in the rear because there's not enough roads, there's not enough places to do it. Well, in a situation like this, if the Russians controlled Avdiivka, they could easily stage 100 armored vehicles or so in the Donetsk-Makivka area and move them up that interstate highway in a matter of minutes, like probably 20 minutes. There could be no armored vehicles in sight, and then all of a sudden, a large Russian force could appear. You have 4 lanes of highway to move this equipment. um, you know, it would and Ukraine, of course, would need to move in their own equipment to take care of something like that, and there's no guarantee that that equipment would be, staged nearby. So, and I'm speculating here, but having control of that highway, having control of Avdiivka would give the Russians an opportunity to start moving in this direction with some pretty powerful forces. Encircle Toretsk, endanger Konstantinivka in this area here. So, I mean, kind of what I'm trying to explain here is, there's a lot of people that talk about the Ukrainian strategy, and like, there's a lot of people that don't seem to understand why Ukraine is holding on to some of these areas for so long when it seems like it would have been better to abandon them. It's like, oh, you would have, saved more Ukrainian soldiers' lives and blah blah blah. But in reality, like, there's vitally important logistic routes that Ukraine is trying to prevent the Russians from gaining control of, and they have a foothold on that Donetsk ring road in Avdiivka. They used to have a foothold, kind of. I mean, it's not really a usable road, but on that ring road in Pesky. And they had a foothold on major Russian potential logistical hub of Bakhmut that could be used against them. Of course, people on the pro-Russian side will be pretty quick to tell you that, like, Bakhmut is an important town. It's not, because you hear this from the Ukrainian side all the time. It's an unimportant town. It's not strategically important. Blah blah blah. Look at all the roads leading in and out of town. I mean, it's like Bastogne. That you have. This is perfect for logistics and armor, just moving in multiple directions and moving out in potentially multiple directions. So, Bakhmut is important. The reason the Ukrainians try to hold on to it is because they don't want the Russians to use that road network against them when it comes to Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and Seversk. Now, similar situation with Avdiivka, similar situation in a lot of these places. All right, real quick, I want to talk about this hypersonic missile story here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up an image of it so I don't have to, editing stuff is sometimes a pain in the ass. But the claim by the Ukrainians is, and this wasn't originally the claim, but it seems like they're now saying this, but originally there was Ukrainian channels that was saying that the Ukrainians had managed to shoot down a Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missile, and not only that, but they shot it down with a Patriot air defense system. And these are the pictures that have been posted as evidence or proof of that. And initially, there were statements that I was seeing from the Ukrainian Air Force saying that this wasn't true, that they don't have the capabilities to do this. Virtually every, large national government superpower, whether it's the Russians, the Americans, the Chinese, they've all basically said that there's no possible way to shoot down hypersonic missiles. And that's not entirely true. So I want to kind of break this apart and then tell you guys what I think, because I've already kind of thrown shade on this on Twitter, but I want to make sure I've articulated what I really think here. But air defense is similar. If you guys know what shooting skeet is, or skeet shooting, those of you that didn't grow up around guns and stuff, you might not know, but or clay pigeons is another word for it. But you have a launcher, it shoots basically this little orange plate of clay up into the air, and you take a shotgun and you try to shoot it out of the air, and it's basically practice for pigeon shooting, essentially. And in order to do that, you have to point your shotgun to a place in the air where you think that clay pigeon is going to cross over, and you have to time it properly so your shotgun shell or the spread hits that clay pigeon at the same time it's passing that point. So you're trying to predict its trajectory and then shoot it down. And air defense works very similar to that. Except for these air defense missiles do have some self-guidance capabilities, right? Like they can course correct a little bit, but it's the same basic concept. Like if you fire in the wrong direction, like the complete opposite direction, that air defense missile is going to have a lot of trouble, arcing back around and hitting the target where it needs to hit the target, right? It's probably going to miss. So you want to point and aim at where you think it's going to be. Now, it's certainly possible to get lucky and predict where a hypersonic missile is going to be and get close enough to where this can happen. So I don't think it's accurate to say it's impossible to shoot one of these down. It's just highly unlikely, because one of the things about these hypersonic missiles is they have the capability to dodge air defense. Like their paths are unpredictable. That's the big reason. It's like you don't know if that hypersonic missile is all of a sudden going to turn 30 degrees and then turn 30 degrees again and keep going. Now, with that being said, I genuinely do not think that what we're looking at here is a hypersonic missile. Just looking at this close-up picture down here in the bottom, you see, like, this is the warhead here on the front. This is probably the navigation systems. This is like where the sensitive stuff is. I'm seeing rivets, where different like panels have been attached together. I'm seeing like markings and all kinds of stuff here. I'm not seeing any of that in either of these other pictures. Not to mention in these top two pictures where this object is on the ground. It's a completely different color. It's covered in dirt and all kinds of shit. I'd initially said on Twitter, like, I don't like, this looks like an old piece of concrete that has like grass growing in it. And, I get that, this might be debris and grass and stuff lodged in this thing from being stuck in the ground. But at the same time, like, this is thicker than I would imagine these missiles to be. It just, I'm not seeing any of the rivets. I'm not seeing any of the markings. I'm really not seeing. I don't think this is the same thing. I do not think that this is what we're looking at here. So, that's my personal opinion. I could be wrong. I think if Ukraine actually had one of these things, they would be posting a lot more images of it. They'd be showing it all around. They'd be showing more convincing proof, like, look, here's a serial number. Look, here's Russian markings, and which it looks like all that stuff is present here on the device attached to the aircraft. So I'm not sure why they would give us this image that's just not complete and not, you can't really tell anything from this, in my opinion. So that's just what I think personally. I don't think this is a Kinjal missile, but I do think that it's potentially possible to shoot one down. It's just you would have to be really lucky. So real quick, to finish up this conversation about Avdiivka and kind of show off some cool map features that I've found. This is just like a fun thing. But I'm playing around with this Deep State UA map, and I'm actually really impressed with it. This is like one of the cooler maps out there. Like you can change it between different map modes, like default, topographic. You can see where the hills are, satellite, and then the coolest, well, it's not. There we go. It's loading now. And then the coolest feature, there's some stuff over here on the side that you can't see, but you could drop nukes. Say I could put a nuke on Avdiivka, call it 100 kiloton, and calculate the blast radius. Kind of scary feature to have. I don't think things are good at nuclear, but kind of cool. Kind of cool. They have this feature here that they call pathogen. Which is, this is a pro-Ukrainian map, and they're trying to say that the Russians are a disease. But what this is a heat map that shows the enemy concentrations or the Russian concentrations of forces. It shows like where they're present. This is maybe potentially based on cell phone data, I think. But it kind of shows you where the Russian army is stationed inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. Pretty cool, and pretty useful feature. And then the favorite feature, the coolest feature that I've found is this artillery feature. And I just want to show you guys, use this as an example for, why certain areas Ukraine would want to defend. We're going to pick a Metza 2S19 self-propelled howitzer, and we're going to do the long-range ammunition. And I'm going to show you, say, if Russia continues to expand their zone of control around this area here, right? Around the Touretsk, New York area. And they can start stationing artillery here. So let's go ahead and put a Metza in here. This tells you like the relative range of what that self-propelled gun could hit. Say the Russians have guns that are shelling Bakhmut right now. They can safely sit back in areas like Klanove, Pokrovsk, Bakhmutske. They can hit things as far as Seversk. They can hit Konstantinivka if they want. Just got to station guns in Zaitseva or in the far western parts of Bakhmut. This is definitely a really cool feature. You can go back and you can change the different types of shells. That's a different kind of ammo. Let's look at M777s. Let's see what Ukraine's range is with Excalibur rounds on M777s. See if they have M777s with Excalibur rounds inside of Avdiivka. They can hit this entire area, all the large cities of Donetsk and stuff. So one of the big reasons why the Russians want to capture this area here. They can hit the front line basically from, they can hit Donetsk from really far back. So this makes me question some of the logic of the Russians wanting to push the Ukrainians out of places like Avdiivka and Marinka to relieve Donetsk of shelling. I'm not sure that it would relieve Donetsk of shelling. See, let's go ahead and change the ammo to something a little more ordinary here. There's still big parts of Donetsk that are going to be affected from Kharkiv and some of these places just in the immediate rear. And that's the lowest kind of ammunition. Let's do the typical, M795, I think is what it is. Donetsk is still within shelling range of the Ukrainians from all of these locations that are nowhere near the front line at this point. So, very cool feature, very interesting feature. Last thing I'll show you real quick is this fire map, which I might use in the future. Shows you where all the fires are inside of Ukraine. Some of these are just regular fires. Some of them are Russian missile strikes. Some of them are possibly Ukrainian troop concentrations, like in these areas here to the east and south of Poltava. Very interesting. I haven't heard anything about Russian strikes in these areas, but they could be, Ukrainian troops camping out. Very interesting, useful map. So that's me just nerding out a little bit, showing you guys some stuff. The last thing I want to do for you before the end is we're going to take it back to the other map, and we are going to look at the overall assault actions right here. So this is where everything's been actually in the last 2 days in terms of the Ukrainian attacks. They seem to be happening pretty daily around Ugledar right now. This gives the picture that this might be a direction that they want to push in, but at the same time, very surprising attacks up near Kupiansk. For the Russians, the darker colors are the ones that are more recent, and then of course the lighter colors and around Bakhmut. That battle's been going on now for it seems like 48 hours straight, and we don't really know what's happening inside of Bakhmut. The last thing that I will say is there is an increase in explosions behind the line on both sides. The Ukrainians launched a pretty big drone attack on Crimea and Sevastopol. We don't really know what they managed to destroy or hit. Of course, the Russians are claiming that they knocked out all the Ukrainian drones. Probably didn't. But there are a number of explosions in Ukrainian cities as well, that we're not getting any information on those targets. So both sides still picking up on the number of strikes they're taking out on one another. So very interesting information there. All right, guys, that is it from me. Until next time.